Chapter 1. The Party. The air in the Keys felt like a wet rag slapped over the mouth. Every breath carried the stink of mangroves, brine, and gasoline from the fishing boats that lined the crooked marina. Jake and Ryan Cooper had only been in town 3 days, and already the place was sticking to them. Salt in their hair, sweat in their shirts, and that lazy kind of dread you get when you realize paradise is just a lie told in tourist brochures. Jake, the older by 3 years, had taken to muttering about how the water looked wrong here, too flat, too green, like something watching from underneath. Ryan, 19 and restless, didn't care. He was already leaning against the rusted hood of their Chevy, grinning as a pair of girls waved from the shoreline. "They said there's a party tonight," Ryan said, thumbing over his shoulder at the narrow spit of sand down the road. "Locals, too, not just tourists. You coming?" Jake squinted at the horizon. Out past the shallows, the sun was sagging into the Gulf, turning the water the color of raw meat. "How many people?" Ryan smirked. "Does it matter?" It didn't, not really. Anything was better than sitting in the motel room with the broken AC unit whining like a dying thing. The party was no more than 15 kids, a crackling Bluetooth speaker, and a stack of plastic coolers bleeding condensation into the sand. They'd built a bonfire from driftwood, the flames throwing wild shadows over their faces as the night thickened. The air was heavy, the kind that clung to you, and the bugs were relentless, whining in ears and settling on bare arms. Ryan was in his element, laughing too loud, shotgunning beers with boys he'd known for 20 minutes. Jake hung back near the fire, arms crossed, scanning the mangroves that hemmed the beach like black teeth. A girl with sunburned shoulders leaned toward him. "You're not from around here," she said, smiling like she already knew the answer. "No," Jake said. He glanced at the water. It lapped at the shore in slow, syrupy waves. "You swim in that." She followed his gaze and laughed. "You get used to it. Just don't go too far out." "Why not?" Her smile twitched. "Currents. Boats. Gators sometimes." She hesitated, then added, "and other things." Jake turned to her, but she'd already moved back toward the music. It happened fast after that. Ryan was the first to notice the sound, something cutting through the rhythm of laughter and bass beats. A kind of wet slapping, like a heavy tarp being dragged across the sand. He thought it was someone messing around, maybe one of the local boys pulling a prank. Then the screaming started. The thing came out of the mangroves like it had been spat up by the swamp itself. Humanoid, but wrong. Limbs too long, skin slick and dark like it had been soaking in brackish water. Its face was a smear of shadows, except for the teeth, too many, too sharp, glinting wet in the firelight. It moved fast, faster than anything should in that muck. One of the boys swung a beer bottle, and the thing caught his arm, yanking him off his feet with a strength that didn't seem real. It didn't kill him clean. It tore him open like it was curious, like it wanted to see what was inside. People scattered, stumbling through sand and shallow surf. The Bluetooth speaker kept playing, tinny and absurd against the carnage, until someone kicked it into the fire and it hissed out. Jake grabbed Ryan by the collar and shoved him toward the truck. "Go!" But Ryan didn't move. He was staring at the water. The thing had followed 2 girls into the shallows. It didn't dive after them. It couldn't. Instead, it crouched low, chest heaving, and then slid into the surf like an eel, arms pulling it under. Seconds later, it burst back up for air, gasping, its wet head snapping toward the sound of their splashing. It wasn't just a monster. It was hunting. Jake didn't wait to see more. He dragged Ryan up the sand, feet slipping, lungs burning. Behind them, the screams thinned into wet gurgles, and then into nothing but the sound of waves and someone sobbing. They reached the truck. Jake shoved his brother inside and slammed the door. His hand was shaking so bad he could barely get the keys in the ignition. "What the hell was that?" Ryan gasped, his voice breaking. Jake didn't answer. He threw the truck into reverse, tires spitting sand, and tore down the narrow road that led back to town. In the rearview mirror, the fire was still burning. And just at the edge of the surf, where the light met the dark, something stood watching them go, shoulders rising and falling as it sucked in the heavy night air. By the time they hit the empty streets of Marathon, the adrenaline had curdled into a cold, greasy fear. Jake parked outside the motel, but didn't move to get out. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Ryan finally spoke. It came up for air. Jake swallowed. His mouth tasted like rust. Yeah, that means it's not. Don't, Jake snapped. He didn't want to say it out loud. Didn't want to put words to the thing that had crawled out of the mangroves and ripped their night apart. But as they sat there in the heat, the sound of the thing's breathing seemed to linger in the air around them. Heavy, wet, hungry. And Jake knew, deep down, that it wasn't done. Chapter 2, The Aftermath. The next morning smelled like diesel and dead fish. The sky hung low and swollen, the kind of gray that promised storms but never delivered, just more wet heat. Jake hadn't slept. Ryan had tried, tossing and jerking on the motel bed until he gave up and stared at the ceiling with glassy eyes. Neither of them said much. At 9, they heard the sirens. Jake stepped outside in time to see 2 sheriff's trucks tearing down the overseas highway toward the beach. No ambulance, just trucks. Think we should, Ryan started. No, Jake said. We stay out of it. But they didn't. The beach was chaos by the time they got there, though not the kind they'd expected. No yellow tape, no news vans. Just a handful of deputies stomping through the sand, swatting at gnats, and barking at each other. The bonfire was nothing but ash now. The surf calm and blank like nothing had happened. A deputy with a paunch and a sunburn waved them off before they even got close. Closed area, he said. What happened? Ryan asked. His voice cracked like he hadn't decided whether to sound scared or casual. The man squinted at them, then shrugged. Looks like some kids got drunk, took a boat out, flipped it. Happens more than you think. Jake stared at the sand. There were drag marks there. Deep, uneven grooves leading from the tree line to the water, like something heavy had been hauled in both directions. What about the ones on shore? He asked. The deputy's jaw twitched. Ain't no ones on shore. Ryan glanced at his brother, then back at the deputy. We saw. Jay cut him off. We were just leaving town. Thought we'd check it out. The man studied them for a beat too long, then jerked his chin toward their truck. Check out faster. They didn't talk until they were back on the road. They're covering it up, Ryan said. His voice had gone thin, like stretched wire. They know something. Jake shook his head. They don't know shit. They just don't want to deal with it. It came out of the trees, Jake. Out of the fucking trees. You saw it. Jake gripped the wheel harder. Yeah, I saw it. Then why are we just driving away? Because whatever that was, it's not our problem. Ryan slammed his fist against the dash, startling them both. It's gonna be. You think it's just gonna stop? That afternoon, they found themselves in a bait shop 2 towns over, pretending to look at lures while the old man behind the counter rambled to a pair of shrimpers. Whole lot of funny business lately, the old man said, chewing the words like gristle. First it's dogs go missing, then a guy down by Bahia Honda swears something pulled his catch clean off the line. Big too. Said it breathed. One of the shrimpers laughed. Everything breathes, Earl. Not like this, Earl said, leaning in. Said he heard it before he saw it. Schauen dit vet, like someone drowning, only they didn't die. Jake froze. Ryan nudged him. See, they didn't plan to go back to the beach. Not really. But when night fell, they drove anyway, headlights slicing through mangrove tunnels, the road slick with mist. It was empty when they got there, just the sound of insects gnawing at the dark. They didn't get out of the truck. For a while, nothing happened. Then, out on the water, something broke the surface. It wasn't a splash, not like a fish or a gator. It was a body, humanoid, rising slow, chest heaving like it had been holding its breath too long. Even from the truck, they could see how wrong it looked. Limbs too long. Head cocked at an unnatural angle, sniffing at the air. And then it slipped back under, noiseless, like it had never been there at all. Ryan whispered, "It's hunting again." Jake put the truck in gear. Not tonight, it's not. But they both knew that was a lie. Chapter 3, The Swamp Breathes. The Florida Keys didn't have real nights, just heavier shades of damp. By the 3rd evening after the massacre, the air felt swollen enough to drink. Ryan stood on the motel balcony, staring toward the line of mangroves that separated land from water. He hadn't spoken much since the second sighting. He didn't have to. Jake could feel his thoughts humming in the thick silence. "We should leave," Jake said finally, voice flat. Ryan didn't turn. "And let it keep killing. It's not our job." "Whose is it then?" Jake didn't answer because there wasn't one. The sheriff wasn't going to do shit. The Coast Guard wasn't going to drag nets for a bogeyman. And the locals would just keep pretending the water was safe. Ryan exhaled through his teeth. "We saw it breathe. That means it leaves signs. It comes up. It's not invincible." Jake's stomach turned. He hated that his brother was right. The next morning, they bought a cheap kayak off a guy in a sleeveless shirt who swore the mangroves were haunted as hell and then laughed like it was a joke. By noon, they were gliding down a narrow channel, the water flat and black, the air so humid it felt like they were paddling through soup. The mangroves loomed overhead, their roots knotted like diseased veins. Crabs skittered along the branches. The smell was wrong here, not just swampy, but sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with copper. "What's that smell?" Ryan muttered. Jake didn't answer. He was staring at something tangled in the roots. A flip-flop, still wet, its strap torn like it had been ripped off a moving foot. They pushed deeper. The first body part wasn't obvious. At first, Jake thought it was driftwood. Then the branch shifted, rolling in the current to reveal pale skin. A hand. Just a hand. No arm attached. The wrist ragged where it had been chewed through. Ryan gagged, the sound sharp in the heavy air. "Jesus!" Jake swallowed bile and forced himself to keep looking. There was more. A rib cage snagged in the roots, hollowed clean like something had scooped it out. Bits of fabric floated nearby, bright colors from cheap party clothes, already turning the sick green of swamp water. "It's feeding here," Jake said, his voice low, as if the trees might be listening. Ryan pointed with his paddle. "What's that?" A slick trail led away from the carnage, a dark line on the water's surface like oil. It shimmered faintly, bubbles rising where it touched the air. They followed it. The channel widened into a shallow pool, hemmed in by mangroves on all sides. At first it looked empty. Then Jake saw the ripples, slow, deliberate circles radiating from the center. Something moved beneath the surface. It rose suddenly, breaking the water in a heaving gasp. The sound was obscene, like someone sucking air through a wet rag. The creature's head and shoulders emerged. Long, stringy hair plastered to its face, skin the color of drowned meat. Its chest expanded and contracted too fast, as if breathing hurt it. Then it stilled. Even from 50 feet away, Jake felt its attention slide toward them. Not sight exactly, more like the pressure of a thought settling on his skull. Ryan froze, paddle hovering midair. The thing tilted its head. Slowly, it began to sink back down, never breaking eye contact. The last thing to vanish was its mouth, stretched into something too wide to be a smile. "Back," Jake hissed. They paddled hard, the kayak skimming over the flat water. Behind them, the pool went quiet again, but Jake swore he heard the faint sound of breathing, long, wet pulls of air, following them through the trees. When they finally broke free of the mangroves and hit open water, Jake's arms were shaking from more than exertion. Ryan was pale, his jaw locked tight. "It knows we're here." Jake didn't correct him, because it wasn't just that the monster had noticed them. It had let them go. Chapter 4, Voices in the Water. The Key's humidity was a thick blanket that settled deep into the bones, and that night it felt like it was pressing down harder than ever. Jake and Ryan sat on the cracked porch of their motel, staring out at the mangroves silhouetted against a black sky mottled with heavy clouds. The distant hum of cicadas mixed with the steady slap of waves against the docks. It was the kind of silence that screamed. Jake lit a cigarette and took a slow drag, the smoke hanging heavy in the warm air. "We're getting nowhere waiting around," he said, eyes fixed on the water. Ryan shook his head, his fingers twitching as if itching to move. "We need no more. People have been talking." He held up a crumpled piece of paper, a page torn from some local tabloid. The headline read, "Monster or Murderer? The Mystery in the Mangroves." Jake flicked ash, already tired of the rumors. Everyone's got a story. Mutated freak, backwoods serial killer, swamp ghost. It's all the same shit to me. Ryan's eyes glinted. Not all of it. Some folks say they've seen it, really seen it, before. They say it's smart, and it waits. The brothers had already heard a dozen versions of the creature's story, whispered in dive bars, at bait shops, and for fishermen nursing too many drinks. Some swore it was a mutation from chemical spills, a man drowned and twisted into something else. Others believed it was a serial killer gone feral, hiding in the swamps and using the water to cover its tracks. Jake exhaled slowly, the smoke swirling around his head like a halo of doubt. Well, either way, it's not human anymore. The next day, they followed leads from the locals, a few hardened fishermen who looked at the world like it owed them a debt. One of them, an old man named Gus, sat at the docks, his face weathered like driftwood. "You boys poking around where you shouldn't be?" Gus asked, squinting under a hat stained with salt and sweat. Ryan nodded. "We want to know what's killing people." Gus spat a dark line of tobacco into the water. "There's things you don't talk about in these parts. Things that don't like to be found. That thing? It's got a taste for flesh. It's not just some accident." Jake folded his arms. "You think it's a person?" Gus's eyes gleamed. "Used to be. Ain't nothing left but hunger and rage now. I seen the signs. Drag marks in the mud. The way the fish scatter when it swims nearby. And it always comes up for air, just like you said." Ryan exchanged a glance with Jake. "How we stop it?" Gus shook his head. "You don't stop the swamp. You don't stop what it holds. Best you can do is not get caught." That night, Jake and Ryan camped at a secluded clearing near the mangroves. The fire flickered weakly against the moist night air, barely pushing back the oppressive darkness that pooled in the shadows. They talked in hushed tones, piecing together what little they knew. "It breathes like a man," Ryan said, poking at the fire with a stick, "but it moves through water like it's part fish." Jake nodded. "It can't stay under forever, which means it has to surface. And that means it's vulnerable," Ryan said, "at least for a little while." Suddenly, a splash echoed from the nearby water. Both brothers tensed, eyes darting to the dark edge of the mangroves. Out of the black water, a pale, slick shape rose, breaking the surface with a wet gasp. The creature's shoulders and head emerged briefly. Long limbs dripping with swamp water, hair matted and tangled. It stared at the firelight, its teeth bared in a twisted grin. Jake raised his flashlight, but the creature slipped back beneath the surface like smoke, leaving only ripples in its wake. Ryan whispered, "It's watching us." Jake swallowed hard. The swamp wasn't just a place, it was a predator, and they were its prey. Chapter 5, The Hunt Tightens. The dawn was barely a sliver when Jake's phone buzzed beside his head, dragging him from a restless sleep. He groaned, fumbling for the screen, half expecting another useless text or a wrong number. Instead, it was a call from Ryan. "Jake, you up?" Ryan's voice was strained, the kind of tension that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Jake sat up, rubbing his face. "Barely. What's going on?" "I found something," Ryan said, breathless, down near the old dock-off Little Torch Key. Jake didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." The drive was thick with silence, punctuated only by the hum of the truck and the heavy Florida humidity pressing against the windows. The sun was still hiding when Jake pulled up to the broken pier, its rotting planks jutting out like splintered teeth into the murky water. Ryan was already there, kneeling beside the mud, flashlight in hand. "What is it?" Jake asked, stepping carefully over the tangled roots and seaweed. Ryan pointed. "Tracks. Not human. Too big, but with finger-like impressions. Look here." He traced long, web marks pressed deep into the soft earth. Jake knelt beside him, swallowing bile as the smell hit, a thick, cloying stench of decay and salt. "That's something else." Ryan's eyes burned in the dim light. "I found more." He reached into the water and pulled out a piece of cloth, dark and sticky. Jake's stomach churned when he recognized the ragged edge of a shirt, one he'd seen before, torn and stained. "People," Jake said quietly. "We're dealing with a killer," Ryan replied grimly. "One who uses the swamp to hunt and disappear." They followed the trail cautiously, moving through the mangroves where the air was so thick with moisture it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. The oppressive heat made sweat roll down their backs and collected in the hollows of their necks. Every sound was amplified: the snap of a twig, the buzz of mosquitoes, the distant splash of water. Suddenly, a noise came from the water nearby, a soft, gurgling sound like someone struggling for breath. They froze. Out of the black water, the creature burst up again, its grotesque figure slick with algae and decay. It moved with an unsettling grace, lunging for the muddy bank, but faltered, gasping violently for air. Its eyes locked on the brothers, and for a moment, something primal and furious shone in them. Then, with a wet, choking scream, it slipped back beneath the surface. Jake and Ryan didn't speak as they retreated to their truck, hearts pounding. The swamp was no longer just a place of hiding. It was a hunting ground, and they were marked. Chapter 6, Dredging the Depths. The oppressive heat of the Florida Keys pressed against Jake and Ryan like a living thing. The mangrove swamp they'd been stalking through felt more like a trap, each step sticky and slow with the putrid rot of decaying leaves and stagnant water. Every breath was thick with the smell of SA.